Now, from the Signature Bank Studios.
Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. By the way, just a technical note. We've gotten a lot of texts and emails.
Yeah.
We're having problems with the app and I guess some of the streams. So an engineer is working on that for people who listen through the apps and so forth.
But you could also watch us on YouTube, Rumble, or Facebook if you would like that. Those options are open, and help is on the way, Dan.
Okay, so Bartle Bull Sr. There's a name.
There you go.
That's a great
I think I went to prom with him. Yeah.
Bartle Bull Sr. writing in the Wall Street Journal, I've been an outspoken Democrat since 1948 when I was the only student in my fifth grade class to vote for Harry Truman. Vote, quotation marks. It's been astonishingly difficult to disclose that next month I will vote for Donald Trump. Like many, I will be doing so in the European way, voting for a party and its issues, rather than in the American way of supporting someone I like. His liberal friends, he said, have expressed their reaction to him when he talks about his views on economics and national security. You sound like Trump or some uneducated hillbilly. Ignoring my schooling at Harvard, Oxford, and the Sorbonne, these friends sound like well-meaning dilettantes, otherwise described as self-righteous, useful idiots. Such responses may prompt me to compare my own liberal credentials with theirs. It makes me a difficult adversary, as I've long been an extremely useful idiot overloaded with liberal credentials. And he talks about being a coordinator for Adlai Stevenson in 1956, arrested as a civil rights lawyer in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, where Vernon Dahmer, the local head of the NAACP, had been burned alive in his house. Campaigned for Charles Evers for governor in that state. Quit my job as a Wall Street lawyer to serve as Bobby Kennedy's New York campaign coordinator. Organized the New York Citizens Committee for McGovern Shriver in 1972. How'd that turn out? And so on and so forth. But he basically says, look, this party is not that party. For a long time, like an locomotive, I've been building steam inside when liberal friends with the certitude and arrogance of the righteous decry me as a right-winger. In a Harvard class reunion speech many years ago, I said that Harvard should stand up to the tyrannies of the left today, the way it stood up to the tyrannies of the right in the days of Joe McCarthy. But the progressive agenda doesn't seem to include what Truman and John F. Kennedy considered liberal values, such as true political tolerance. So now, as a lifelong Democrat, I'm voting Republican for policy reasons, not because I like Trump. I believe my old party, as it abuses the powers of office and threatens to pack the Supreme Court and end the filibuster, now supports a government that is far too strong at home and far too weak abroad. That's a pretty good description, I think, of what a lot of people are feeling, even if they didn't go to Harvard, and which is why Kamala's efforts last night to talk about all these never Trump Republicans that are supporting her and former Trump administration officials. It almost feeds the Trump narrative going back the last decade, which is he's sort of not part of either party. It's a pox on both parties. He made some decisions. He didn't fully appreciate how deep the swamp was and so forth. I mean, this is the way that many people are reacting, supporting Trump. So these Beltway creatures that are now opposed to him, I don't care if they have an R on their lapel, they're still Beltway creatures, and that's the problem. And the other problem is that the left has swung so far left that right-thinking people, regardless of their academic credentials, are finding something that is just anathema to their values, like all the women at that Harris-Faulkner town hall with Trump yesterday who raised their hands when the question was asked, are you concerned about men playing women's sports? A below-the-fold issue that speaks to perhaps larger cultural unease with where Kamala and her party have taken and desire to take the country. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Noah Rothman, senior writer at National Review, author of The Rise of the New Puritans, Fighting Back Against Progressives' War on Fun. Noah, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
How do you think Kamala held up under questioning from Bret last night?
Not well. So it was the interview equivalent of shock and awe. Just surgical strike after one glaring policy vulnerability after another. And she just does not have satisfying answers to any of these questions. In fact, most of those answers had not evolved over the course of her very short campaign, from what she knew about Joe Biden's infirmities and when she knew them, to her evolution from radical progressive to born-again moderate, to even the issue of Iran, where she gracefully said and deservedly said that Iran was one of our primary adversaries abroad, then sort of pivoted in that answer to attacking Donald Trump for getting out of the JCPOA. So while she's saying the Iran nuclear deal, so while she's saying we should increase pressure on Iran and its proxies, she's also attacking Donald Trump for getting out of a deal that relieves pressure on Iran and its proxies. It was a failure of an interview on its own terms, in a very specific way. Brian Fallon, Harris campaign spokesman, said in a statement after the interview, the objective here was to put Kamala Harris in front of an audience of independent voters and Haley Republicans, a very small universe of nevertheless persuadable but right-leaning Republican voters. And she didn't give them anything. She gave them nothing to hang their hats on and allay their fears that she's a radical progressive in this guise, and she would be a proper steward of their interests in the Oval Office. That being said, a lot of her critics are saying this is a career-ending disaster. And I think they're letting the wish father the thought there a little bit, because it was a good interview insofar as it was a different interview for Kamala Harris. It was an adversarial interview, and the performance that she put on was akin to the one that she showed on the debate stage against Donald Trump. It was prosecutorial. Once she started treating it like a boxing match and getting in the weeds over Fox News itself. And she kind of got her back up, and I think she activated some of the partisans on the Democratic side who are otherwise unenthusiastic about this election cycle, much less that candidate. So just by virtue of going into the lion's den and not melting down, I think she gets a little bit of credit from her voters. And in a base election where tiny margins matter, that could matter. That being said, I don't think she achieved her primary objective. I'm not sure if she did herself any long-term harm where there's a clip that's going to haunt her from this thing for a while. But nevertheless, it did not achieve the objectives she was set out to achieve.
Maybe on transgender surgeries for prisoners and illegals. I thought that's where,
that's one thing, right? Where she called that. She said, I think, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think what she said is that is a remote issue.
Yes, that's what she said. And I'll follow the law, right? Mm-hmm.
But most people don't want their tax dollars funding elective surgeries for people who committed crimes. So once again, they're protecting the victims protecting the suspects and the bad guys instead of helping the victims.
Right, and she sort of is insulated, I suppose, because she managed to cite that very late-breaking New York Times article, which found that this medical care is legally protected. But that's distinct from the issue here, which is a cultural issue. It is what faction of the culture is promoting this as a societal value and which isn't.
Well, right. I mean, it's
the issue, and I think most voters see it.
Right. It's legally permitted for men to play women's sports thanks to the Title IX rewrite by the Biden-Harris administration, but it doesn't mean it's the right thing. And this whole posture she takes as, she was this fierce advocate, again, all of her 180s, but she's this fierce advocate. And now she's just a passive enforcer of the law, whatever the law happens to be, and particularly when she's part of changing the law. That's not very persuasive.
Right, and as though the Democrats over the course of the Biden administration have been scrupulous enforcers of congressional statutes.
Right.
The Biden administration has occasionally said, well, I'll pass the eviction moratorium and then the courts can strike me down, or I'll violate the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment to give COVID aid to the rights of constituents and let the courts strike me down. That's how this administration is governed, and now they retreat to the law when the law suits them to justify their own policy preferences. It's more than a little crazy.
The last week, though, for Kamala, trying to shore up some of that base vote that you were talking about, base constituencies like Black and to a lesser extent Latino voters, And these appeals specifically to black men that she and her surrogates like Barack Obama have made, they seem to be drawing quite the reaction, but not the reaction that Kamala and her team, I think, desired.
Well, I'm not sure. I haven't seen the polling that indicates there's been much of any reaction. Donald Trump continues to outperform his previous, according to polling at least, outperform his previous totals with African Americans broadly, and more so among African American men. But the smaller you define the demographic, the harder it is to nail it down, as you're talking about such a small population that it's hard to get an accurate sample and thus an accurate assessment of their outlook. We really have to wait until Election Day and after to see what that looks like, what the demographic breakdown looks like. But the reaction that you would think black men would have to a proposal that includes making marijuana federally legal would be a little insulting. What does that have to do with your direct economic interest? Certainly as an opportunity agenda, that's the opposite of an opportunity. It's an opportunity to waste your time and energy.
I just think it's,
God bless you if you want to have a recreational life, outside of work. That's fine. But don't mask it as though this is to elevate a particular demographic and provide them with the tools to succeed where they have been otherwise denied you. It's kind of a rank standard, and it comes from a place that if it was coming from a Republican, progressives would recognize the uncharitable assumptions embedded in it and call them out.
it's just so insulting. If I was a black man, I would be beside myself. Legalizing marijuana and creating industry opportunities for black Americans, as if they can't do anything else besides, oh, well, we'll give you marijuana.
You can be a black man. You just identify as such.
Yeah. Okay, sure.
Yeah.
The other thing was that, it was providing these $20,000 forgivable loans to, and then the language was to black men and others. And others there is the load-bearing phrase that makes it constitutional.
And forgivable loans are not loans.
Unconstitutional.
Yeah,
and the administration tried to do this. They tried to do this when they provided a certain small business administration loans to particular demographics, and the court said you can't do this. It violates the 14th Amendment. You know this. And we do know this.
I mean, do you see, assuming a Trump victory, do you see that Trump having really realigned the political landscape, remade the Republican Party now as a decidedly, for lack of a better description, working class party?
No, I do not. I see it as, and I'll explain why. I do see it as it's broadening its appeal rhetorically to this particular demographic. And I think you're going to start to see some movement on the Democratic side towards the green eye shade side of the ledger that they've otherwise not been, just by virtue of the centrifugal force of American politics. We cannot have two parties of the same mind on the stability of America's embattled entitlement program. We just won't. We will have two parties opposed to that issue. And right now, the Republican Party doesn't want to be that. The Democratic Party, as it increasingly accrues educated voters with college degrees, is likely to shift its policy preferences, albeit on the margins. That being said, Republican voters, as measured, to say nothing of all voters, as measured in polling, are not skeptical of the free market. They are not more afraid of the market's ravages than they are of government intervention into private affairs. They are still that party, which is a conservative outlook. It is a conservative approach to public policy. And that is not the outlook of the vast majority of quote-unquote working-class Americans who prefer a broad social safety net, on average, on net, prefer a broad social safety net, and would like to see the government insulate them from life's, file down life's sharp edges and insulate them from the broader consequences, perhaps, of their own actions and of also actions that they have no control over. That's not a conservative philosophy, and I think the Republican Party is still home to the majority of conservatives in this country. It is not a popular or fashionable outlook at this point, but we have very few indication that Donald Trump has remade the party in his own image. Rather, it has remade the party into something that is inclined to defend him and his personal affect and outlook. But all the people who attempt to mimic his persuasion, policy matters or otherwise, or certainly his affect, enjoy far less success than he has. I still think this is a conservative party, the primary conservative vehicle for a small government outlook in this country. And the appeals to working class voters, well, on an electoral basis, are valuable for this party and have gotten it to a particular place that makes it competitive with Democrats among this demographic. But when Donald Trump is gone from the political stage, and one day he will be, I don't know whether that condition persists, because I don't think there's anybody who quite channels that sentiment like he does.
Noah Rothman, senior writer, National Review, author of the book The Rise of the New Puritans, Fighting Back Against Progressives' War on Fun. Noah, thanks as always.
Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
IC Catholic Prep in Elmhurst is an AP honor roll school dedicated to challenging and inspiring young men and women, offering opportunities to grow in your faith and participate in exciting extracurricular activities. IC Catholic Prep is a great choice because of their tight-knit community, dedicated teachers, and rigorous college